everyone, and welcome to another episode of A Shot of Inspiration. My guest this week is someone new in my life that I've met a couple of years ago, but we haven't spent a lot of time together. I've met him through Crucial Learning. He's a master trainer. His name is Greg Sammis. Greg, welcome to the show. Thanks for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate
Thanks. Greg is someone that he always has a positive attitude. Every time I've worked
it.
with him, he's got a great energy. And from what I hear of his classes, people love him. Greg, I just have a let's start out with how did you run into Crucial Learning in the beginning, and how did you become a master trainer with it?
It's funny. I actually tell this story in my Crucial Conversation classes because my whole connection with Crucial Learning goes back to when I was working. I call it at like my last full-time job, and it was for Electronic Arts in Northern California, the game company that does Madden and FIFA and all that. And I was working in their L&D department, and long story short, I had a manager who was brand new to me, but I had been at the company for a couple of years. And we'll just say that our first few run-ins over the first few weeks and months that she was my manager just did not go all that well. Fast forward a few months later, we're going through Crucial Conversations as a team, and I'm sitting with my learning partner, and we're talking about what real crucial conversation we need to have. And I'm like, I need to talk to that person over there, my manager. At the end of the class, when the facilitator says, now it's time, go have your real crucial conversation, I was that person who was going like, no, I'm not going to have this conversation. There's no way. And I was lucky enough, though, that my manager was also thinking about the same crucial conversation to have with me. And she sat down with me and she very candidly said, let's have a conversation. Let's talk about what our relationship has been like for the last few years, and let's see if we can do something about it. And after a lot of work, a lot of conversations, a lot of vulnerability and transparency, we actually got to a really positive place in our relationship. So much so that I really looked to her as a coach, a mentor, one of the significant people in my life. So at one point, the then sales rep from the Northern California area is reaching out to different certified trainers in Crucial Conversations, and they're looking for a master trainer in the Bay Area. And he calls up my manager and says, would you be interested in doing this? And she said, well, I'm very happy in my job, but I know that my direct report loves facilitation, has been doing it for a long time. And based on what she and I had been talking about, I knew that my job was like moving in a direction where I wasn't going to be doing as much facilitation anymore. And my heart was breaking over that. So when she comes to me and says, there's this offer, it means you've got to leave EA, but you'll get to teach Crucial Conversations. You'll have the independence of working when you want to. And it's an organization that we know, we've worked with, we believe in. What do you think? And I jumped at the opportunity. And so now whenever I tell that story in class, I always say to my audience, it's like the last thing I tell them. And I say, I wouldn't be here today talking to all of you teaching this class had my manager not had that crucial conversation with me. And I'll say this, nice to also be able to teach content that had that level of impact for me, but also is content that I believe in so much as well. So anyway, yeah, that's basically how I got involved with Crucial Learning.
That's so you taught there for a while, and then how did you find out about a master certification with working with a master certified group?
That pretty much happened right away. So Zaid
Wow.
Badwin was the one
Huh?
who was working in that area, and he had a lot of clients who were looking for someone in the Bay Area, but didn't want to have to pay for travel for someone coming in. So he
I,
talked to me about fast tracking me into master trainer status. And
okay.
I think I started in October of 2016, and by January of 2017 I was in Provo sitting with Stacy Nelson getting master certified, so it was pretty quick.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I've heard nothing but great things about you working with Crucial Learning. And what are
Who
some
said
of
that?
the
Tell me. I want some names.
I got a couple of people that for sure. What are some inspirational testimonials you've run into from some of the people, some of the stories that come to mind? Because I get them all the time. You're talking about having one with your boss the other day, and I years ago, I remember I was in Rochester, Minnesota, working with a group, and this guy, he said, "I've been working with my boss." He said, "This is my last stop." He said, "If this doesn't work, I'm leaving the company. We're moving to Raleigh, North Carolina."
Yeah.
And he had lunch with me during the class. Coached him, and he's just couldn't stand his boss. And about 6 months later, I get a call from him, And he said, I don't know if you remember, man, with such and such company. And I said, I was about to leave the company. I said, oh, yeah, I remember you had lunch. He
Yeah.
said, yeah. And I said, did you move to Raleigh? And he's not going to believe this. My old boss and my boss and I, we're going on vacation together with our families this summer. And I went, what?
Wow.
He said, we sat down, we had the conversation, and we found out our stories about each other had just built up, and we handled all that. And then we found out our sons were friends with each other at school.
No
And we
kidding.
found out we had more in common. He said, he's become one of my best friends over the last 6 months.
Yeah.
And
That's
I have
amazing.
I have questions. I have stories like that everywhere about doing this. What are some of the ones you've
Yeah,
heard?
similar to what you're describing. I unfortunately, I wish I had more of the follow up. I wish I had heard from people after they had gone and had these conversations. But I think the first one that kind of jumps to mind is I was having a conversation with someone. It was after a class actually, and she was talking to me a little bit about a personal conversation that she was having with her spouse. And the thing about that conversation that kind of sticks out for me, I think the reason I remember it is because her kind of, I think, first thought around crucial conversation, the question that she had around it was one that we typically get all the time. You know, that question of, I'm coming to the conversation, I'm doing a great job. What about the other person? And they're not showing up. And so she's saying this, like, I've had these conversations with my spouse and we've talked about listening. And she says, I still just don't feel like I'm being heard, and that he's really taking the time to understand what it is that I'm saying. And I asked her what those conversations sounded like. And pretty indicative to, I think, a lot of this, what I hear from people is that it seems like all of these people are talking at levels of what we would call right content and pattern, the way they're talking about the actual conversation and the events of whatever it is. And I said to her, I'm like, what do you want from this relationship? What is it that you're trying to achieve? And she's talking more than about, I want to have a connection with my husband. I want to feel like he hears and respects me and that we understand each other on this deeper level. And so I said, so is that what you're talking to him about when you have a crucial conversation with him? And she's, no, I'm talking about the dishes, and we're talking about his socks being left on the floor. And so, just in talking to her about it, we were able to get to this place of that recognition, like, it's not about the dishes and it's not about the socks on the floor. It's about the way you feel about him and the way that you feel as a result of those interactions. So yes, the socks on the floor, the dishes, those are part of it, but it's about your relationship and highlighting that in the conversation that you're having with him. And so the reason I just think about that, though, is because, like you were talking about, she had, at the beginning, that little back and forth that she and I was having, she was saying that I've tried to have this conversation for so long, it hasn't gone the way that I wanted to do. And she even has said, in the last few months, I've just given up. And so much of, I think, of the work that we do is that recognition that people try to have these conversations, they don't go the way that they want. They go to that kind of helpless mode of just, I guess there's nothing else I can really do about this. And at least at the end of that conversation, I was able to say, if you love him enough and you care enough, then there's still a conversation available to you.
Yeah.
And I think part of that was that recognition for her to go, oh, there's still hope. There's
Right.
still another approach I can take. And I want to believe that however that conversation went, it got them where they needed to go. Again, I can't make predictions about what happened, but I hope at least it got them to a positive outcome as a result of it. Because I'll even say this, so much of, I feel like, what my job is as a teacher of communication skills and things like that is to help people not only be able to have more effective conversations, but just actually really ask themselves what the real conversation is that they're trying to have with people.
Yeah.
And I think that was the conversation she had some hope to be able to actually have with her spouse at that point.
Yeah. You had mentioned something about when you finished the class that you weren't going to have the conversation. What percentage of people do you think really fall into that in our classes? At least I think it's a huge percentage.
I do too. I don't know how many people, or I should say, the job titles that most of the people that you work with have, but having done most of my work in Northern California, it's engineers, it's really analytical. I forget what is that, left brain people, I think, the ones who are just mathematical and strategic and linear in their thinking. And so then I come in, I talk about vulnerability and I'm talking about transparency, and they give me this, really? I don't know about that. So I think you're absolutely right. I think the number of people who don't go and have that conversation that they're working on is higher than I would like it to be. Gosh, even 50% or higher, maybe.
And yeah, it makes me sad because I know the results of the people who go have the conversations.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's just it. I want everyone to do it, but I also tell people at the end, I said, now's the time to set a date for your conversation. And I said, if
Yeah.
you've decided you're not going to, be honest about it. Don't lie about it.
Yeah.
Just
I appreciate that so much. I
well,
mean, just at least admitting it.
yeah, just own it because you've made a decision that you're not going to do that. Let's
Yeah.
not continue bad behaviors and things like that. But if you're going to do it, put a date on it. But I
Yeah.
typically now also start a class to letting them know at the end of class, we're going to put a date on the conversation you're going to look at.
Yeah.
And so be focusing on that because what I find is if they go out and have it, whether it goes well or not, it gives them a bit of confidence. It's different than they've
Yeah.
done. What I find so many times we're battling against is their past
Yep.
because they know how that past is gone, but they've never tried it with the new skills. And that's that whole the other thing I find that's really difficult because people have huge breakthroughs. And I said, one of your other barriers is going to be how other people see you. And people,
Yes.
what do you mean? I said, you come in, you have an experience, you're a different person when you walk out.
Yeah.
They see the same person that walked in this morning.
Yeah.
And they're going to continue to see that until you have consistently over time
Yeah.
proven, and it takes 6 to 9 months of behavioral change before other people begin to see you differently. And that's one of the biggest barriers you run into.
I'll often share this story, especially when we're talking about state my path and you're looking at what you're actually saying in the conversation. And I say, the first time I went and used this skill with my sister, I think her response to me was like, why are you talking funny? And I had to explain to her, I'm like, I'm trying to use this skill that I just learned about here so I can have a more effective conversation. And exactly to your point, I say to them, number one, it's going to take a little bit of time for you to find language and find a way of saying it that feels authentic and real for you,
Yeah.
but also to set the expectation that other people have of you that, hey, this is the way I communicate now. This is because I know it works and because I know the results that are potential from using these skills. This is what I'm going to use. I always say transparency is king. If it
Oh, yeah.
feels like you're using a skill and they think you're using a skill, you are. So tell them you're using a skill.
Exactly. That's one of the things I always tell people. Also, if you're public speaking and something's running in your mind, I'll even tell people I'm almost 60 years old. I still break out like a teenager. I've got a terrible complexion today. And people are like, that's kind of
But
weird. But I throw it out there to get it out of my space so
there you
it
go.
doesn't take over. And
Yeah.
that's just a facilitation piece that I do. And it just works for me.
Yeah. I'm curious, and I know we're focused in on crucial conversations, but
Yeah.
what do you find is the piece of content from that resonates the most with people, that has the biggest impact?
Well,
I know what I would say. I'm curious what you would say though.
hands down, mastering your stories.
Yep.
But I've also found two things since then. Anytime you get hung up in a conversation, besides you got to manage your emotions, but always fall out to your good back to your good intent. It's interesting. We didn't used to teach it as going in first, and I always taught it that way. I
Yeah.
always thought that best intent has to go first, and we're
Yeah.
teaching it that way now, which I'm happy about because all the skills you might use some here or there, but for me also the big one in the last couple of years is listening.
Yeah.
Really listening to understand. Stop trying to talk so much.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, I so appreciate that because, and to your point about just saying to the audience what you're thinking about, because when I get to the clever stories, the victim, the villain, and the helpless stories, I get very real with my audience and say, okay, I'm going to get up on my high horse here for just a minute, because in my work, in my experience, coaching people, working with audiences, but also just in my work with myself, that potential for a victim story is, I feel like, the number one thing that holds us back. And I so appreciate mentioning, okay, great. If you're not going to have the conversation, make that choice. Make it so clear for yourself that you're the one making that choice. So that way, whatever result you get from there on, you got to own it then. You got to choose to say, I'm getting this because of myself. And when I get to that victim piece, it becomes for me even more than just about communication. And
Yeah.
it's a thread really that kind of goes through all my work. If you're talking about management skills, getting things done, whatever it is, what I almost, I know maybe this is putting too much of a weight on it, but I feel like my purpose as a facilitator and the work that I'm doing, the age that I'm doing this work in, is if I can get the people in my class to look at their life and say, the results that I'm getting in my life are directly connected to the choices that I'm making,
Mhm.
then I feel that maybe there's a little bit of hope there, right? There's a little
Yeah.
bit of that sense that people can walk away from a conversation and say, I'm showing up in the best way that I can. I'm trying to get the results that I want. And I'm coming to this conversation with as much compassion as I possibly can, because I know that me looking at this other person, calling them a villain, assuming that they're responsible for all of this, that's not going to get me anywhere. I've got to
No,
own my part of it. And that might be a really significant part of it. And it's hard, but if you can do that, wow, what a difference it makes.
I agree. No, that's my previous life before I did this work. I look back now and I was a victim in so many areas of my life. You might look and say, wow, he's really successful. But deep down, I was a victim around nearly everything I ran into.
Yeah.
And when I learned these skills, someone also gave me a mantra about the same time. And
Yeah.
this goes with getting out of the victim story.
Yeah.
What's my role? But the mantra is this: everything in my life I create, promote, or allow.
I love
And
it.
I own that. I have ability to begin to change those things. I
Yeah.
can't do it until then. I have no power. And
Yeah.
that's one of the things I found is so if you're feeling powerless, that's the piece you've got to get back to. You've got to
Yeah.
take ownership, just like you're saying.
Yeah.
And your facilitation, when did that start?
When I was 20 years old, I was working for a company called Super Camp. And this was when I was in college. And I was working with them in the summertime. And this was my very first summer with them, my very first camp with them. And it's a 10-day life skills and skills program. And one of the things we do, like on day 9, so last full day that the kids are actually there, is we do this activity where we give each student a 1 foot by 1 foot pine board, and they write on an index card, usually some sort of goal or vision of themselves, something they want to try to achieve in the future. And then that's really just to set context and give them something to aim for. But then on the board itself, and this is kind of life-changing part of it, is they write one word, maybe two, that describe the biggest barrier preventing them from achieving what's written on that card. And so it's usually things like insecurity, fear of failure, things like that. And I had one kid who was my project for that camp because he was like, I don't want to be here. My parents made me be here. I hate this. I just can't wait to go home. And it was one of these things where I was working with him and talking to him, and just everybody kept coaching me and saying, this is one of these kids, you just got to kill them with kindness and just love them for the length of the time that they're there. So we do this activity, and usually at the end of it, it's a big celebration, 150 kids all with their 2 pieces of board that they've broken in half, really excited about it. And I see him standing off to the side holding the board with this confused look on his face. And I just walked up to him and I said, hey, what's going on, man? And he's looking at the board and he looks at me and he goes, this is forever, isn't it? And I said to him, if you want it to be. And he just kind of nodded his head and then just went off with the crowd and started celebrating everything like that. And it was this thing of, number one, okay, after 9 days, I think finally we maybe got through to him. But it's also this sense of this realization of the impact that I can have on people. And even more that when creating the right situation, the right environment, that people can even have self-guided experience where they get exactly what they need from it. And that was a little bit of a shift for myself right there in that moment too, of recognizing that not everybody's going to have exactly the experience that I want them to have, but there is a trust that I can have that they're going to have exactly the experience that they need to have. And I think that's even true nowadays with teaching crucial conversations and getting things done. I know the impact that it's had for me. The best I can hope for is to create the kind of situation or environment where they're going to have whatever experience they need to have from it. I will tell you, started really when I was in college I started college in 96, graduated in 2000, and I got connected with this company called the Quantum Learning Network, and their main program is called Super Camp. And um, I, at that time when I was in college, I really thought, oh, I'm going to be a high school teacher. I'm going to teach English in high school. And so that was a way for me to get my feet wet, start working with students, and just get some experience with what it felt like to be a teacher. And I ended up actually staying with that company for a really long time and doing contractual work over the course of about 8 years with them. And so, like I said, I started with them when I was in college. And then, having worked through a couple of the different roles in the organization, I applied to be a facilitator with them. And I give them a lot of credit because I think hands down is probably some of the best facilitation training money can buy. Because what they did is, if they hired you on as a facilitator and it was your first time with them, you would actually come to a 12-day program where you were staying on site at a program that was happening in conjunction with the training. And there was a cohort of about 20 of us, and we would split our time between prepping to deliver presentations and facilitate events, delivering them for each other in small or large groups, or actually going and observing a real program with students as it was happening to see what those facilitators are doing. And from an experiential learning perspective, which is one of my degrees, it was very holistic. It wasn't just, here are the keys to facilitation and you raise your hand this way and you stand here and you do this. It was much more about, what does it mean for you to stand in front of people and speak? So day 2, I think, of the program, they get you to stand up in front of the group of 20 people, and you've got, oh my, it felt like an eternity, but it may have only been 5 minutes, but they're timing it, and you're just standing there and you're not saying anything. And the whole group is just sitting there watching you. And it's so easy, right? You just stand there and you're just looking at everyone. But at the same time, you're just kind of laid bare because there's no mask. You're not pretending to be anything. You're just standing there with people watching you. And it's this sense of like, when you are, and this was what I took with me. It's what stayed with me for my whole career. It's like, when you're in front of a group of people, everything about who you are influences what it is that you're doing. And so I used to share this with people, that the reason I got into being a facilitator and standing in front of people was so I could get my parents to like me. Ooh, this is a way for me to get validation and recognition, attention, and all these things. And that helped me get through the first little bit of being a facilitator. But at some point, that perspective for me had to switch and go, oh, I'm not standing up here for me. I'm standing up here for everybody who's in front of me. And that shift of everything that I'm doing right now, from what I'm wearing, what I'm saying, how I'm saying it, and you can even get into the details of hand gestures and tone of voice and all that, but all that's going to influence the learning experience of the people in front of me. And we're talking about victim mentality. If I have that belief that part of my role is to change these people's lives for the better, then I got to let go of all of that insecurity and all that baggage that I'm dragging up on stage with me, really put all of my focus and attention on them. And it can be challenging because sometimes, and I'm sure you know this, right? You get that person in the room who's just pushing back and who is just not buying into what you're saying and questioning it and just uncertain and everything. And to still, the way I think of it, still to come to that interaction with that person with love and say, there's still something I can do for this person, even though they may be completely against everything that I'm saying. Can I still meet them with kindness and compassion and believe that there's something I can give for them? That's that shedding of the ego and all of it that's
Yeah.
necessary to reach out to them.
Yeah, and so many people in facilitation don't go that route, and that's why I think the master trainers we with, most of them do,
Yeah.
because that's what I've seen with the people on stage. And what I love is they allow us to do it our own way as well. They want us to be us, true selves. And I just find there's power in doing it that way. But your little exercise of standing up there, it's interesting. It's so noisy in here, isn't it, in that head
Oh yeah.
during
Oh
that
my God.
time? Until I had a similar exercise I went through. We were in a group and we had to stand across from someone we didn't know and look into their eyes, completely
Yeah.
just be present with them. And you're sitting there for, I think it was 3 to 5 minutes. It's uncomfortable. Some people laugh, some people cry. They said, okay, what are you doing? What are you thinking about? Are you being
Yeah.
present or are you in your head? And they went through that. And then at the end, they talked about it and did the exercise. I went, oh, that's great. It's over. They go, okay, now go to the next person. And you did it again. And you did it again. And I don't
Yep.
know how many times we did it, but I lost my fear of being in front of a room at that time. And I wasn't doing it.
Absolutely.
I had facilitation and training was never on my map at that time.
Yeah.
But it was an exercise I went through in another training and it just got rid of all that fear of standing in front of a group so I could actually be with them. Sometimes I also let uncomfortable silences work for me in class.
Oh, absolutely.
I just pause and then I go, Did you hear that? It got loud in there, didn't it? And everyone starts laughing. And but I
I might
love
steal that line. I like that. I'm going to use that.
just because it's so loud. I even had some leaders, I can't do that. I can't stay in that uncomfortable silence. And when they say that, I know I can actually, if I were to coach, I could actually dive into there because there's
Yeah.
something there if you can.
There's another program I went through, and one of their kind of, what would you call it, their, I guess, key learning phrases, if you will, and they repeat it all the time, is the way that you do anything is the way that you do everything.
Oh, that I
And
say that all the time. How you do
yeah,
anything's how you do everything. That's
yeah.
every class. Yeah.
And the coaching that I'll give to people, I remember as another example, when I was at EA, I was seen as one of the presentation people. So I was coaching a few people before they were going to go give a TED talk, things like that. And I was working with someone who was very clear. She's like, I did not get into learning and development to be a facilitator. I'm an instructional designer. That's what I like to do. But the reality is, I know I have to get up in front of people and speak. And so she said, I would just love to be better at this. And as we started to get into the work, there's always the kind of tactical things you can do about keeping your weight balanced on both feet, and how are you using hand gestures and tone of voice. But then at one point, she's delivering her content just to me. It's just me in the room. And I stopped her and I kind of asked, okay, so yeah, what's going on up here right now? Like, just what you were just saying right there, what's going on? And she said, I'm thinking about what I want to say, and I'm thinking about what's on the slide, and I'm thinking about what comes next. And I said, okay, what's underneath that? And just keep asking that question. Okay, what's underneath that? What's underneath that? It's almost, what's that child inside of you saying in that moment when you're standing in front of a group of people? And for this person, it got to this level where she was able to say, I want them, the group, to believe that I know what I'm talking about.
Ah, the fear.
And it was this, yeah, exactly. So I said, okay, how is that serving you? How's that holding you back from being a better facilitator? And she said, serving because it's motivating. It makes me want to really know what I'm going to say and say it well. And I said, okay, and how's it holding you back? And through the conversation, basically what it came down to, she said, it's making it about me and not about them.
Right.
And I said, yeah, there's no space up there for the people who are in front of you. And I asked her, I'm like, do you believe that you know what you're talking about? And she was like, yeah, I think. And I was like, okay, there's step number one, right? Is
Right.
you've got to believe that you know what it is you're talking about. Because
Yeah.
even they don't believe it, you can find that internal confidence for yourself. And then from there, like you said, if there's a release of that fear, to say that I believe in myself, I believe in what it is that I'm saying, and I believe that even if everybody in this room walks out of the room just hating every minute of this, I can feel like I'm at least in integrity in what it is that I delivered and doing my best.
Very true.
And I'm probably saying this just because it's by my experience with facilitation, but I'm like, if everybody goes through facilitation training, it's just one of those ways to get underneath and understand what's driving us and motivating us in these moments of vulnerability, in these moments of fear. And just the other piece I'll share around this too is, like, I think I've been a facilitator for we're in 24 years now, from starting in college all the way till now. And it's like, I feel like I'm good enough at that, that now in this other part of my life where I'm doing more music oriented stuff and performance around that, I'm like, oh, that's now where I get to explore the same fear. I get to do it all over again in an entirely different arena where all that insecurity, all that fear is coming up again, because all the voices in the head of, I'm not good enough, I don't know what I'm doing, no one's going to like this. It's, oh, I remember this from 24 years ago when I first started facilitating. Oh, good. Still with me. Great.
So what are you doing with music? This is something I didn't know about. So share with us what
Yeah.
you're doing. Yeah.
I started playing guitar and drums when I was in high school and played through college. I was in a couple of bands in college and after college, and it was always something that was there. And I guess you might say this is my own version of a midlife crisis. Over the pandemic, I started looking at where I'd come in my career. I was very happy with it. I'm like, I've got my own successful business. I'm working with a lot of people that I love. I'm teaching content that's great. If I look at the next 40 years of my life, what do I want that to be about? And I even had a chance to go through some coaching with a dear friend of mine. And through that process, music really ended up taking this kind of front stage position for me, no pun intended. But I realized this is something I want to at least take it as far as I can and see where it goes. And yeah, for the last year or so, I've been taking classes with the Berklee School of Music online, learning about more production and stuff like that. So I've been producing my own music on my computer, doing all that sort of stuff, learning how to mix and master and everything. And I'm hoping to be launching my own website in the next year or so. And the cool thing is my kind of vision for all of this is I heard an interview with Rick Rubin, who's, most people haven't heard of him, but he's this producer who's worked with U2 and Barbra Streisand and all of these people. And if you name an album from the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, more than likely was connected to it somehow. And he had this special on Hulu where he got a chance to just sit and talk to Paul McCartney about what it was like to be in the Beatles. And they even have all these classic Beatles songs out on a mixing board. And they're able to talk about, okay, let's turn all these off and just play this one instrument and let's talk about what was going on there. And what's amazing about him is when he talks about his process of music production and working with artists, it's exactly what we've been talking about. It's what's your message? What's underneath it? What's the fear that's maybe getting in the way? And there was this kind of spark for me a little while ago where I went, there's a chance for me to take the coaching, the facilitation, all that work I've done here, and maybe start working with young musicians and help guide them towards something that they want to say and get past some of that fear, insecurity, and ego and find something that's authentic and true for them. So I'm working towards seeing if I can do some work like that with people.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I had no idea. That's awesome. Before we finish up, what
Yeah.
inspirational message would you like to share with the group that are listening? Maybe a story from someone who's taken some of your skill sets or something personal that you have. What would be one inspirational piece that you would like to leave listeners with?
You're only going to let me share one, huh? I think I have 10 I could maybe share.
Well, you know what? This was so smooth. I want to do this again. This is fun.
Yeah.
Really fun.
I guess here's what I would share. There's kind of two things that have been probably the biggest, most influential pieces in my life, at least. We've been talking a lot about fear and overcoming insecurity and ego and things like that. And in my life, a lot of that was manifesting around a really significant fear of death. It was sort of like keeping me awake at night and oddly enough, driving a lot of decisions that I was making in my life. I didn't feel like there was a lot of people in my life who I could talk to about it and understand it. And in the last really actually started maybe like 6 years ago, I started reading a lot more about it. And somebody, I forget how, oh, actually I do remember, was on a podcast with Mark Maron. They were talking about a book called The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker. It's this Pulitzer Prize winning heavy philosophy book. And I read it cover to cover, making all these notes and everything, just trying to understand it. And I found an organization called the Ernest Becker Foundation, and it's this nonprofit group that's about talking about his thoughts and his ideas and things like that. And I got connected with them and actually started volunteering with them. I'm now on their board of directors. And anyway, there is a branch of psychology that has come out of Ernest Becker's work called terror management theory. And just to give you an example of kind of the work that they do is they're trying to look at how does a subconscious fear of our mortality influence our decision making. And their very first experiment that they did was around judges who the experiment they did was they got judges together and they said, okay, so you're going to have to set bail for this hypothetical case. A person has been charged with prostitution. What do you set the bail at? And before they had them do that, they had them answer a questionnaire. On average, they'd answer the questionnaire, ask, and they set the bail at $45. Then for another group of judges, they brought them in, asked them the same questionnaire, but in the questionnaire, they added in one question that just got them to think about their mortality just for a moment. Then they asked them to set bail. The average was something like $450.
10 times.
Yeah, significant differences there. And they've been able to replicate that result in any number of other experiments and things like that. The core message that Ernest Becker talked about and what they've now been able to demonstrate in a lot of these experiments is that as human beings, we're in this weird place where we're simultaneously aware that our lives are limited, that we are mortal, that it's going to come to an end, but we still have the same instinctual drive for survival. And so when you start to look at how that influences the way that we make decisions, it comes out where they're able to demonstrate a lot of things like where homophobia, racism, war, violence, any sort of human atrocities that we do to each other is connected with this underlying fear of our death, because we create these structures to manage that anxiety. But then when we run up against a person or a group that has a different system in place, we react, yeah, oftentimes violently against that, because it's, if my system isn't true, now all of a sudden I have to come to grips with all of these things that I've been managing through this system that I built for myself. So anyway, why this is impactful for me is one of my heroes is Gary Shandling, the comedian.
Yeah.
And he tells this story about when he was in college, he was going to become an engineer and was on the engineering track. And he said what happened to him was he was getting into his car and it was parked, and there was another car that was driving past him while he was getting in. And it got a little too close and it clipped it, took the door off of his car. And then he said he woke up a day later in the hospital going, what just happened? And it was this moment for him, this recognition for him of, oh, my life is limited. I've only got, I don't know how much time. I better do something that I really want to do with this. So he gave up engineering. He may have dropped out of college, I don't remember, and immediately started to do stand-up comedy because he knew that's what his passion was, and he knew it was that he wanted to do. And so for me, the way that I've been managing a lot of my own death anxiety and coming to grips and understanding it is just that, is to say, all right, today's another day that I get. It's a gift. What am I going to do with it? And there's a word that I always repeat to myself. I got it from a biopic about J.R.R. Tolkien, and it's this old Scandinavian Viking word called Hellheimer. And it's this idea of there is honor and there is something just valuable about dying in battle. And the interpretation there, going for the things that scare you, going for the things that really terrify you, but that you know are valuable, you know you want. And if you die, quote unquote, in the result of going after, that's honorable. That's amazing. That's something to applaud, as opposed to allowing the fear to prevent you from even trying in the first place. It's that moment of, I'm about to walk into something that scares me right now. Hellheimer, here we go.
That's great. That's awesome. That's awesome. I love that. But Greg, it has been a pleasure having you on. I love your
Yeah,
stories. We'll definitely do this again.
I hope so. Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. And thank you for joining us for another episode of A Shot of Inspiration. I'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye bye.